Imagine this. You're standing in a crowded room, surrounded by laughter, conversation, the hum of 100 voices blending into white noise. Everyone around you is connected, engaged, speaking the language of shared assumptions and comfortable lies. But you feel like a ghost moving through solid matter. Not because you're shy or socially awkward, but because something inside you has shifted. You've seen something they haven't. You've asked questions that, once asked, cannot be unasked. And now, every conversation feels like watching actors perform a script you no longer believe in. You try to join in. You force the smile, nod at the right moments, laugh when expected. But beneath the performance, there's a chasm growing, a space between what you know and what they're willing to see. The more you understand about the nature of existence, the mechanisms of society, the illusions we collectively maintain, the more isolated you become, not by choice, but by necessity. It's as if your awakening came with a price tag written in invisible ink. To see clearly is to walk alone. Today, we will uncover why the chosen man, the man destined to awaken to deeper truths, always walks alone. And stay with me until the end, because the last revelation we will explore is the most powerful of all, one that could forever change the way you see your place in this world. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. This conversation is not just about ideas. It is about you, your journey, and the invisible forces shaping your life. Share this with someone who is searching for meaning, because what we are about to discuss could become the turning point of their inner path. Here's the paradox that haunts you. The deeper your understanding grows, the fewer people can follow you there. The more authentic you become, the more alien you appear to those still wearing masks. You thought wisdom would bring you closer to others, but instead, it has built walls made not of your rejection of them, but of their inability to meet you where you now stand. And so, you're left with a question that echoes in the silent hours of the night. Is this isolation a curse? Or is it the very thing that defines your purpose? Think about what happens when you try to share your deepest insights. You speak of the illusion of the self, the cosmic game of consciousness, the beautiful meaninglessness that paradoxically gives life its greatest meaning. And what do you get in return? Blank stares, nervous laughter, a quick change of subject, not because they're stupid or cruel, but because your words threaten the foundation of everything they've built their identity upon. You're not just challenging their beliefs, you're challenging their reality itself. The chosen man, and by this, we don't mean someone selected by divine lottery or born with a special birthmark. We mean the one who has been compelled by something within himself to dig deeper, to question harder, to refuse the comfortable numbness that society offers as a substitute for genuine living. This person discovers a terrible truth. The path to authentic existence is a path that grows narrower the further you walk. The crowd thins. The companions fall away. Until one day, you realize you're walking alone, not because you've abandoned others, but because the territory you're exploring can only be traversed in solitude. But why? Why must it be this way? Why does awakening demand isolation? Why does consciousness of the cosmic game require you to step outside the circle of those still lost in the play? Is it punishment for daring to see? Is it the universe's way of testing your resolve? Or is there something far more profound at work, something that transforms this loneliness from a burden into the very mechanism of your transformation? Consider this. What if your solitude is not a bug in the system, but a feature? What if the chosen man walks alone not because he has failed to connect, but because he has succeeded in connecting with something so vast, so all-encompassing, that the ordinary bonds of human relationship can no longer contain him? What if loneliness is the chrysalis, and what emerges from it is something that transcends the very need that created it? The masses move in herds because herds are safe. They confirm each other's illusions, reinforce each other's fears, and together, they build elaborate fortresses of belief that protect them from the terrifying freedom of actually seeing reality as it is. But you've already stepped outside the fortress. You've tasted the air beyond the walls. And now, no matter how much you might sometimes wish to return to the comfortable confines of collective delusion, you cannot. Your eyes have adjusted to a different kind of light. So the question isn't whether you'll walk alone. If you've truly awakened, that question has already been answered. The question is, can you understand why you must? Can you grasp the hidden purpose in your isolation? Can you see that your solitude is not empty space, but sacred ground, the only place where certain truths reveal themselves? What's coming next will disturb you. It will challenge everything you thought you knew about loneliness, about wisdom, about the price of consciousness itself. But if you can stay with this discomfort, if you can resist the urge to look away, you'll discover why the chosen man's solitude is not a failure of connection, but the deepest form of it. The isolation you feel isn't random. It's not bad luck, poor social skills, or some character flaw you need to fix. What you're experiencing is the inevitable consequence of a psychological and philosophical transformation that most people will never undergo. And here's what makes it so insidious. Society has conditioned you to interpret this solitude as a problem to be solved, rather than recognizing it as evidence of your evolution. Carl Jung understood this deeply when he wrote about individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the collective unconscious that governs the masses. Jung observed that as a person begins to individuate, they necessarily separate from the herd mentality. Why? Because the herd operates on shared illusions, collective projections, and unconscious patterns that keep everyone synchronized in their sleepwalking. The moment you wake up, you're out of sync. You're operating on a different frequency. And to those still dreaming, you appear not as awakened, but as strange, threatening, or simply incomprehensible. Think about what happens in your brain when you question fundamental assumptions. Neurologically, you're literally rewiring neural pathways that have been carved deep by years of social conditioning. You're dismantling the default mode network, that autopilot system that allows most people to navigate life without truly thinking. When you start asking, who am I really beneath these roles? Or, what is consciousness? Or, why do we accept these arbitrary rules as absolute truth? You're engaging in a cognitive revolution that isolates you from those whose brains are still running on the factory settings. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly when he declared that the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. The tribe doesn't want you to individuate. It needs you to stay asleep, to keep playing your assigned role, to maintain the collective fiction that gives everyone else comfort. When you refuse, when you dare to think for yourself, the tribe doesn't send a welcome committee. It sends rejection, ridicule, and marginalization. Not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. Your awakening threatens their dream. But here's the deeper problem. The tribe lives inside you too. You've internalized its voice. That's why your solitude feels so painful. Part of you, the part that was shaped by years of social conditioning, still believes you need the approval of the crowd to be valid. Still believes that if you're alone, something must be wrong with you. This internal conflict creates a specific kind of suffering. You can't go back to unconsciousness, but you haven't yet fully embraced your solitude as sacred. You're caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Arthur Schopenhauer described human beings as porcupines in winter, trying to huddle together for warmth but pricking each other with their quills. Most people find a comfortable distance close enough to feel connected, far enough to avoid the pain of true intimacy or the discomfort of genuine difference. But the chosen man, he's realized something the others haven't. The whole game of finding the right distance is itself an illusion. The warmth you're seeking isn't out there in the careful management of social distance. It's an understanding that you are the warmth itself. This realization doesn't come from philosophy books or meditation retreats, though those might point the way. It comes from direct experience, from sitting with your loneliness long enough that it transforms into something else entirely. Most people never do this. They fill every moment with noise, distraction, digital connection, anything to avoid the silence where their unexamined selves wait. They mistake constant stimulation for aliveness and constant company for connection. But you can't fill the void with more of what created it. And this is the hidden problem. Society has given you a map that leads nowhere. It tells you that success, relationships, achievement, and recognition will make you whole. But these things only work if you remain unconscious enough to believe in them. Once you've seen through the game, the prizes lose their appeal. Not because you're depressed or cynical, but because you've tasted something real. And now the artificial flavors of social validation taste like cardboard. Jean-Paul Sartre understood this when he wrote about bad faith, the way we lie to ourselves to avoid the crushing weight of absolute freedom. Most people live in bad faith because authentic freedom is terrifying. It means you're responsible for creating your own meaning in a universe that provides none. It means you can't blame your parents, your circumstances, or society for who you've become. The chosen man has stopped living in bad faith, and this is why he walks alone. He's willing to carry the weight of his own freedom, while others prefer the comfortable chains of collective belief. This is the root of your isolation. You've become psychologically and philosophically incompatible with the operating system most humans run on. And there's no going back, no software update that will restore you to blissful ignorance. The question now is whether you'll resist this transformation or surrender to it. What you don't realize yet is how deeply this shift has already altered your reality. The consequences of your awakening aren't just emotional or social, they're existential. They reshape how you perceive time, meaning, relationships, and even your own identity. And the most dangerous part? These changes happen so gradually, so subtly, that by the time you notice them, you're already living in a different world than everyone around you. Consider what happens to your relationship with time. Most people live in what psychologists call clock time, a linear progression of past, present, and future, where they're always chasing the next achievement, the next milestone, the next moment, when life will finally begin. But you've started to experience what Alan Watts called eternal now. You've realized that the future is a mental construct, a story you tell yourself, and that all you ever have is this moment. This awareness is liberating, yes, but it also makes you impossible to synchronize with those still racing toward imaginary finish lines. When others talk about their 5-year plans, their retirement dreams, their desperate need to make something of themselves, you hear the frantic ticking of a clock they've mistaken for life itself. You see them sacrificing the present for a future that will never arrive, because when it does, they'll simply invent a new future to chase. And you can't participate in this collective delusion anymore. Not because you're lazy or unmotivated, but because you've seen through the mechanism that keeps everyone running on the hamster wheel. This creates a specific form of alienation. Your friends think you've lost your ambition. Your family worries you've given up, but you haven't lost anything. You've found something they can't see. You've discovered that the race they're running is rigged, that the finish line keeps moving, and that the only way to win is to stop playing. But try explaining this to someone still convinced that achievement equals existence, and watch them look at you like you've lost your mind. Then there's the cognitive bias that keeps them trapped, the sunk cost fallacy applied to their entire worldview. They've invested so much decades of belief, effort, identity construction into the stories society told them about who they should be and what they should want. To question those stories now would mean admitting that vast stretches of their lives have been spent pursuing illusions. The psychological cost is too high, so instead they double down. They work harder, consume more, post more, perform more, anything to avoid the silence where doubt might speak. But you've already paid that cost. You've already faced the devastating realization that much of what you were taught was designed not to liberate you, but to make you a functional cog in a machine that doesn't care about your awakening. And having faced that, having survived the death of your old self, you can't unknow it. You're operating with a completely different set of assumptions now. This manifests in strange ways. You notice how conversations are really just people taking turns to perform their identities rather than genuine exchanges of truth. You see how most relationships are transactional exchanges of validation, security, or social status, carefully disguised as love or friendship. You recognize the scripts people follow, the complaints they're supposed to have, the dreams they're supposed to chase, the fears they're supposed to express. And once you see the scripts, you can't unhear them. Every interaction becomes a play you're watching rather than participating in. Neurologically, what's happened is profound. Your brain has begun to override its evolutionary programming, the deep tribal instincts that equate acceptance with survival. For 300,000 years, being cast out from the group meant death. Your ancestors who didn't care about social approval didn't survive to pass on their genes. So you're hardwired to feel physical pain when socially rejected, to experience anxiety when you don't conform, to seek the approval of the tribe at almost any cost. But consciousness, this strange emergent property of complex brains, has given you the ability to override even your deepest programming. You can feel the pain of social rejection and choose solitude anyway. You can experience the anxiety of nonconformity and refuse to submit. This is simultaneously your greatest power and your heaviest burden. You're fighting against millions of years of evolution every time you choose authenticity over belonging. And here's the consequence nobody warned you about. The more awake you become, the more you realize how asleep everyone else is. And this knowledge is unbearably lonely. Not because you feel superior, in fact, it's often the opposite. You see the innocence in their dreaming, the way they're simply doing what they were programmed to do. You can't hate them for it any more than you can hate a fish for swimming. But you also can't join them anymore. You're like someone who has learned to breathe underwater while everyone else is still confined to the surface, convinced that the thin layer of air above the water is the entire universe. This is the unseen consequence. Your solitude becomes not just social, but metaphysical. You're alone not just in the sense of lacking companionship, but in the sense of inhabiting a different reality. The same streets, the same cities, the same world, but you're seeing something behind it all. Something vast and strange and beautiful and terrible that most people will never glimpse. And that vision cannot be shared, cannot be explained, can only be witnessed alone. But here's where everything shifts. Here's where your solitude stops, being something that happens to you and becomes something you consciously choose. Because the moment you understand why you're alone, you gain the power to transform that loneliness into liberation. This is the rebellion not against society, not against other people, but against the part of yourself that still believes you need their permission to exist. The first radical shift is this: stop trying to translate your truth into their language. You've been exhausting yourself trying to make people understand what you've seen, diluting your insights into palatable sound bites, performing elaborate explanations to justify your different way of being. But here's what you haven't realized. They don't need to understand. Your awakening doesn't require their validation. The universe didn't ask for a vote before showing you what it showed you. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the most meaningless place imaginable, a Nazi concentration camp, discovered something profound. You cannot find your purpose in the approval of others or in external circumstances. Your meaning must come from within, from your response to what life presents you. The chosen man who tries to make others understand his solitude is still seeking meaning outside himself. He's still hoping that if he explains it well enough, someone will say, "Yes, I see it too. You're not alone." But the rebellion begins when you stop needing that confirmation. This means developing what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate, not passive acceptance, but active embrace of everything that is, including your isolation. When you stop resisting your solitude and start seeing it as the exact condition necessary for your transformation, everything changes. The loneliness that once felt like exile becomes a monastery, a sacred space carved out from the noise of the world where you can hear the whispers of something deeper. Here's the counterintuitive truth. The more you embrace your aloneness, the more authentically you can connect with others. Because you're no longer connecting from need, from desperation, from the anxious craving for validation. When you do encounter someone, even in a brief conversation, a passing exchange, you can meet them as a sovereign being, meeting another sovereign being. No masks, no performances, no desperate grasping. Just presence, meeting presence. These moments are rare, but they carry more genuine intimacy than years of conventional friendship built on shared illusions. Look at the historical examples. Buddha didn't achieve enlightenment in a crowd. He sat alone under a tree until the false self dissolved. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, away from the disciples who wanted to make him their idea of a Messiah. Nietzsche wandered alone through the mountains, writing truths that wouldn't be understood for generations. Thoreau built his cabin at Walden Pond, deliberately distancing himself from a society he recognized as living lives of quiet desperation. These weren't failures to connect, they were conscious withdrawals necessary for transformation. But rebellion also means breaking free from the romantic notion of solitude itself. You're not a tragic hero, misunderstood and noble in your isolation. That's just another story, another identity you might construct to make sense of your experience. The real rebellion is dropping all stories, including the story of being the chosen one who walks alone. You're not special for being isolated, you're simply awake. And wakefulness doesn't make you superior. It makes you responsible. Responsible for what? For not wasting this vision, for not squandering this hard-won clarity on bitterness, self-pity, or spiritual ego. The chosen man who understands his solitude doesn't become a hermit who judges the world from his mountain cave. He He becomes a bridge, someone who has walked in both worlds and can, when the moment is right, help others across. Not by preaching, not by trying to wake people up before they're ready, but by embodying a different way of being that might, someday, inspire someone else's awakening. This is how you break free. You stop fighting your nature. You stop apologizing for seeing what you see. You stop performing normalcy to make others comfortable. You let yourself be exactly what you are: strange, solitary, awake without justification. And paradoxically, this is when you become most useful to the world. Because the world doesn't need more people playing roles, following scripts, maintaining comfortable lies. It needs people who have walked through the fire of their own becoming and emerged, transformed. The practical reality is this: you build a life that honors your solitude rather than fights it. You choose work that allows for deep focus and independent thought rather than constant collaboration and groupthink. You cultivate a few relationships with people who can meet you in silence, who don't need you to entertain them or validate their worldview. You create rituals of solitude. Walks, writing, meditation, whatever, allows you to regularly return to that still point within yourself where truth lives. And you accept that most people won't understand. You accept that you'll be called weird, antisocial, cold, detached. You let them have their interpretations without defending yourself, because their misunderstanding of you is not your problem to solve. Your only responsibility is to remain true to what you've seen, to continue walking your path especially when no one walks beside you. This is the rebellion: choosing depth over breadth, authenticity over approval, truth over comfort. Not because you're trying to be different, but because you've become incapable of being anything else. And in that incapacity lies your freedom. Now we arrive at the deepest truth, the one that transforms everything that came before it. The one that turns your solitude from burden into benediction, from isolation into cosmic union. And it's this: you were never alone. Not for a single moment. The solitude you've been experiencing, the separation you've felt from others, from society, from the world, it was all a necessary illusion. A stage in your awakening to something so vast that it will shatter every conception you have of loneliness and connection. Alan Watts spent his life pointing to this truth from every possible angle. You are not a separate self, isolated and alone, navigating a hostile universe. You are an aperture through which the universe looks at itself and explores itself. You are not in the universe. You are the universe, temporarily focused into this particular form, this particular perspective, this particular moment of consciousness. Think about what this really means. Every sensation of loneliness you've ever felt was the universe feeling lonely through you. Every moment of isolation was the cosmos experiencing what it's like to forget its own unity. Your solitude wasn't a mistake or a punishment. It was the universe playing the most elaborate game of hide-and-seek imaginable. It hid itself so completely in the form of you that it actually convinced itself it was separate, alone, cut off from everything else. And now, in this moment, it's beginning to remember. The chosen man walks alone because he's the part of the universe that has been selected not by some external God, but by the internal logic of consciousness itself to wake up from the dream of separation. And waking up requires distance from those still dreaming. Not because you're better, but because you're playing a different role in the cosmic drama. You're the character who discovers he's in a play, who sees the stage and the lights and the audience, while others are still convinced the play is reality itself. But here's where it gets truly profound. The moment you fully realize that you are the universe experiencing itself, loneliness becomes impossible. Not because you suddenly have companionship, but because the very concept of being alone dissolves. How can the universe be lonely? What could it possibly be separate from? There's nothing outside of it, nothing beyond it. Every person you meet, every tree you pass, every star you glimpse, they're all you, in different forms. The separation was always illusory, a trick of perception necessary for the game of existence to be interesting. This is what the mystics of every tradition have tried to articulate in their stumbling, inadequate language. This is what Buddha meant by no self, what Jesus meant by I and the Father are one, what the Upanishads meant by Tat Tvam Asi, Thou art that. Not as abstract philosophy, but as lived experiential reality. The chosen man's solitude was the pressure that forced him deep enough to discover this truth. Without the pain of separation, he might never have searched for the unity that was always there. Now, consider what this does to your understanding of your entire journey. Every moment of isolation, every rejection, every time you felt like an alien in a world that couldn't understand you, it was all necessary. It was all perfect, not in some saccharine, everything happens for a reason way, but in a much deeper sense. It was the exact sequence of experiences required to crack open your illusion of separateness. Your loneliness was the chisel. Your false self was the stone. And what's emerging is the recognition that there is no individual you that could ever be truly alone. But this realization doesn't make you passive or resigned. It doesn't mean you stop caring about others or retreat into solipsistic detachment. Paradoxically, recognizing that you are everyone means you can love everyone more deeply, not because you need them, but because loving them is literally loving yourself. When you hurt someone, you're hurting yourself. When you help someone awaken, you're waking up another part of the universe that temporarily forgot what it was. The chosen man who understands this becomes a force of conscious evolution, deliberately participating in the universe's awakening to itself. This is why your solitude was sacred. In the silence, away from the distraction of constant human interaction, you could hear the voice that isn't yours but sounds through you, the voice of existence itself, speaking to itself, exploring what it means to be conscious, aware, alive. Every great spiritual teacher, every profound philosopher, every visionary artist discovered this same truth. That solitude is the womb where the separate self dies and the cosmic self is born. And death is exactly what it feels like. The ego doesn't surrender its illusion of separateness gracefully. It fights. It bargains. It creates elaborate stories about why you're special, why you're cursed, why you're different. But those are just its last desperate attempts to maintain the illusion of being a separate entity. When you finally let it die, when you stop identifying with the voice in your head that says, I am alone, what remains is pure awareness, pure presence, pure being. And that awareness has never been alone, because it's the substance of everything that exists. Alan Watts compared it to a wave on the ocean, terrified of being alone, not realizing it's made of the same substance as the entire ocean. The wave says, I'm isolated, I'm temporary, I'm going to die and disappear. But it's wrong. It was never separate from the ocean. It was always ocean, temporarily wave-shaped. And when the wave form dissolves, the ocean doesn't lose anything, it just returns to itself, ready to form new waves, new expressions, new perspectives on its own infinite nature. This is your destiny. Not to remain forever alone, but to realize you never were. Not to find companionship eventually, but to recognize that you are companionship itself, the universe keeping itself company through every form it takes. Your solitude was the meditation, the intensive training, the dark night of the soul that prepared you for this realization. And now that you've glimpsed it, even if only intellectually at first, you can never fully believe in your separateness again. So when you feel lonely now, you can recognize it as the universe playing its game, temporarily forgetting its unity so it can experience the joy of remembering. When you walk alone, you can know that you're walking as the ground walks, as the air walks, as consciousness itself walks through this particular form. The chosen man doesn't walk alone because he's been abandoned. He walks alone because he's learning to see that alone is just another word for all one, for the unified field of existence that includes everything and excludes nothing. And here's the final gift. Once you truly understand this, you can return to the world of human interaction without losing what you've discovered. You can engage with others, form relationships, participate in society, but from a completely different ground. You're no longer seeking completion from them, no longer desperately hoping they'll validate your existence. You meet them as the universe meeting itself, playing the elaborate game of pretending to be separate beings, having a conversation. And in that recognition, there's a lightness, a playfulness, a profound joy that doesn't depend on whether they understand you or not. The chosen man walks alone, ultimately, so he can discover he was never walking alone at all. His path was the universe's path. His awakening was the cosmos waking up to itself. His solitude was the sacred space where the greatest realization possible could finally dawn, that there is only one of us here, wearing 8 billion faces, walking 8 billion paths, all leading back to the recognition that we are, and always have been, the infinite awareness that dreamed this entire reality into being. This is why your solitude matters. This is why it was worth the pain, the confusion, the years of feeling like you didn't belong. Because through that crucible, you discovered what no crowd could ever show you. That you are not a small, separate self, struggling alone in an indifferent universe. You are the universe itself, temporarily experiencing what it's like to be you, learning through your solitude what it could never learn through endless connection, that beneath all the apparent separation, there has only ever been one consciousness, one being, one eternal presence, looking out through every eye that has ever opened. Walk alone then. Walk in the full knowledge that your solitude is the universe meditating on its own nature. Walk knowing that every step is taken by the ground itself, moving through you. Walk as the chosen man, not because you're special, but because consciousness itself chose this particular form to wake up in this particular moment. And in that walking, in that wakefulness, you become what you always were. Not a lonely fragment, but the whole experiencing itself from this unique and irreplaceable perspective. That is the ultimate truth. That is the reason why the chosen man must always walk alone, not as punishment, but as initiation into the deepest secret of existence itself.